March 2020. Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord finally arrived in early access, 8 years after its announcement, and it exploded onto Steam. Within hours, it reached nearly 250,000 concurrent players, making it the biggest Steam launch of 2020. Fans who had been asking Bannerlord when were ecstatic. Over 1,000 Steam reviews poured in within the first few days, at 88% positive ratings. Reddit was on fire with hype posts, and people stuck at home, mostly thanks to 2020's circumstances, but suddenly they had the perfect quarantine buddy, a massive medieval sandbox to lose themselves in. Of course, early access meant rough edges though. Bannerlord's foundation was epic, but the version we got was riddled with bugs and incomplete features. Players joked it was Warband HD, a bigger version of its predecessor, but with some quirks. For instance, a famous bug caused one AI kingdom to snowball and conquer most of the map within a year of in-game time, leaving players scratching their heads as Karadia was unified before their eyes. Sieges, in particular, with hundreds of troops, often turned into clown shows with soldiers jammed into castle doorways or climbing invisible ladders. Many character perks didn't even work. Crashes and performance issues were common too, and long load times had us reminiscing about the old dial-up days. The difference was though, Tailwords acted quickly. The devs pushed out patches daily within the first week. Seriously though, 7 patches in 7 days, they squashed crashes, toned down map conquering AI, and improved stability at breakneck paces. This endeared them to the community on Steam's forum, and on Steam's forum, it was refreshing to see devs so responsive. This all led to the community sentiment during 2020 being largely positive. The game itself was a huge success, but now 5 years later, I wanted to see, where is it now? What is Mount & Blade 2 doing, and where is the future of this medieval epic? 2021, patches, patience, and player-made content. In 2021, Tailwords kept refining Bannerlord's core with the community's expectations evolving. The year kicked off with the devs acknowledging the game needed a bit more time before release, so kept it in early access for a little bit longer. One big focus was enabling all those skills and perks that had set idle. As patches rolled out, suddenly your character's fancy engineering or trading perks started to work properly. The devs also added in features that fleshed out the world. Rebellions could break out in unhappy towns, clans had more dynamics, and the simulation of war and peace between AI kingdoms became way more balanced. One of the biggest improvements at the time though was the introduction of a battle terrain system. This made battlefields correspond to the location on the campaign map. You know, no more fighting in random desert scenes when you are actually having your army in snowy mountains. Think about the game Rome Total War. This had a very similar mechanic, where the overworld map directly correlated to the battle maps themselves. If there was a river on the right hand side, you'd fight over that. If there was a bridge that spanned this continent, you would be fighting a bridge battle, or if there were seas, you could see them in the distance. They all worked pretty well, and now that was coming to Mount & Blade 2 itself. It was a subtle change that made everything feel just a little bit more immersive. Despite steady progress, parts of the community though started to become a bit restless. By mid-2021, some players, especially on Reddit, were openly wondering why certain promised features were still missing in action. One highly upvoted thread bluntly asked, 10 years of development and still so bare bones. Others chimed in, echoing that the game felt incomplete in areas, like the sandbox lacked later game content or that the kingdom management was too simplistic. It's not that Bannerlord had regressed, I mean it was still much better than it was in 2020, but expectations were sky high. The phrase hasn't fulfilled its potential started to float around a little bit, capturing the feeling that the game, whilst good, could have been better. But if anyone was keeping Bannerlord's potential alive, it was definitely the modding community, which absolutely exploded in 2021. With modding tools in hand, talented fans began reshaping the game in jaw-dropping ways. 3 mods particularly took the spotlight. First, we had the Old Realms. This was a total conversion that flings Bannerlord into the Warhammer fantasy universe. This was kind of released in early to mid 2021, but it's still going strong to this day, bringing magic, demons, and Warhammer style factions to Karadia. Suddenly, players could wield fireballs and lead regiments of skeletons. It felt like an entirely new game. We'd had huge overhauls in the previous game, Mount & Blade Warband, but it was so much bigger within Bannerlord. By the end of the year, the Old Realms team had added massive new maps and even a working magic system with multiple schools of spells. Seeing Bannerlord's engine handle wizard duels and chaos monsters was a little bit wild. A fan trailer for the update showed wood elves armies marching through enchanted forests, which is not really something that we'd seen in a Mount & Blade game before. Realm of Thrones, as the name suggests, was a mod that transported the game into Game of Thrones. An early build hit Nexus around April of 2021, and fans of the show and the books rushed to join House Stark or Lannister. The mod creators built a huge map of Westeros and Essos, complete with major houses and all their banners. Maybe you wanted to fight alongside the Unsullied or charge in with the Dothraki horde. This was all possible. The mod started to expand, adding in famous characters, and of course the wall in the north as the White Walkers were coming on their way. By later updates, we were even getting things like dragons and White Walkers, and boy, was it epic. I mean, I remember seeing the first time a dragon was used in Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord. It was awesome, to say the least. Then we had the multiplayer side of it. Bannerlord Online was perhaps one of the most surprising mods. It turned the single-player sandbox into a multiplayer MMO-like experience. In early 2021, it launched a test version where players could join a persistent world together. People were literally running around the campaign map in real time with others, forming parties, trading goods, and hunting bandits in co-op. It was rough around the edges, but still functional. The mod gained traction pretty fast, and by late 2021, hundreds, if not thousands of players could be on a server, and the modders were adding features like group battles and even clan wars. Bannerlord Online started to scratch that itch for a co-op campaign that Tailwoods had said that they officially couldn't do, but it never really once again reached its full potential. With all this community content, 2021 was the year where, even though the base game wasn't finished, players still had a lot to do. You could jump into vanilla Bannerlord, or maybe into the Warhammer world, or maybe even Westeros. The player sentiment started to evolve on just waiting on Tailwoods, but also cheering on mod teams. Tailwoods themselves kept integrating modder feedback into patches, and by the end of 2021, the game itself was more and more polished. The community, whilst being impatient, largely accepted Bannerlord would be ready when it's ready. And after we'd waited all this time, was it a few more months to go? Plus, with the buffet and mods keeping us busy, often fixing or compensating for missing features, we were content to keep playing and waiting. Yet it was 2022 that was Bannerlord's breakthrough year. Tailwoods geared up for the official 1.0 launch, meaning that implemented final features, squashing bugging remains, and of course preparing for a newly announced console release was all on the cards. Early in the year, they opened a beta branch with some major last step additions. One of the best crowd pleasers was battle banners, where troops could actually carry banners into battle, all having their own effects on the army, like, I don't know, more archer resistance or faster cavalry charges. This had been hiding in the code for ages. I mean, modders had already made mods that enabled banners long before, but they were officially disabled. Now, seeing your standard bearer charge forward with your custom sigil flapping in the wind just felt right. It also provided a tactical buff to troops, so it wasn't purely cosmetic. One Redditor joked, "Bannerlord finally has banners, the world is healed." Tailwoods also fine-tuned the CGI, which had long annoyed players, and they reduced those pile-ups on ladders and actually taught AI to take turns while climbing them. The audio side got love too, with new voice acting and lines, with battle cries being added, injecting more life into the game, and by mid-2022, pretty much all the pieces were in place. The main questline was playable, kingdom management had more depth, and most known issues were addressed. Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord would officially release as a full game on October the 25th, 2022, on PC, PS4, PS5, and Xbox One. Yeah, it was pretty big news, and finally console gamers had something to play. Release day arrived, and Bannerlord left early access. PC players updated to version 1.0, and console players jumped in fresh. The launch went relatively smoothly. On PC, it was really just another patch, albeit a satisfying one. So the game didn't suddenly transform overnight, but for many, it was a moment to reflect on how far the game had come since 2020. Press outlets had published official reviews. Generally, scores landed around 7 or 8 out of 10, and critics praised the massive battles of freedom, but noticed its jankiness and shallowness in the strategic layer. Of course, the game had been out for some years in early access, but new players were starting to come in, and they loved the scope, especially on console. Nothing had really come out like this on console before, and long-time players, well, they were just as happy to get the game that had recognition beyond our little niche. Importantly, Tailwoods made it clear that this release was not the end. They promised continued free updates to the base game and hinted at future DLC down the line. Sure enough, post-launch patches started arriving, addressing console-specific issues and adding a few more touches, like a photo mode or more localization support for international players. The modding community didn't miss a beat either. Thanks to the Steam Workshop support, which went live around the full release, installing mods became a lot easier for everybody. Within weeks of 1.0, most major mods were updated to be compatible. In fact, the full release, it brought even more modders on board, including total conversion settings for feudal Japan, and of course things like Eagle Rising, which added in ancient Rome, became more refined. With the full release behind them, Tailwoods spent 2023 polishing Bannerlord further and delivering on some promises. Early in the year, a notable update added in the option to retire your turn and continue as your heir, or pretty much just end the campaign with a score, adding a bit of a generational gameplay for those longer dynasties. On the community side, the conversation started to shift. Hundreds of thousands of players had experienced Bannerlord by this point, and I think people were starting to get a little bit happy, or at least content with the game at this point in time. Many players did agree with some of the reviews, like Tom's Guide, who said they loved the first 100 hours, but argued it didn't dramatically advance behind Beyond Warband's formula, and that Tailwoods could have done more in those years. People said diplomacy still felt rudimentary, and the mid to late late game kind of felt repetitive, others countered that Bannerlord's strength is providing a robust sandbox system. The community had taken it to the next level, and indeed, 2023 was definitely the year modders effectively took the helm. The major mods from before continued to grow in spectacular fashion. The Warhammer mod released new versions, adding in entire new kingdoms like the Lizardmen and Skaven. By mid-2023, they implemented magic to a degree that felt like a full fantasy RPG. You could play as a necromancer, raising the undead army, or a bright wizard hurling fire in sieges. It was mind-blowing to long-time players that this was still Bannerlord underneath. Realm of Thrones reached a polished state with its 6.0 update, which included actual dragons and the looming threat of the White Walkers in the north. Players shared these war stories and joining forces with Jon Snow to fight the Night King's army. And once again, Bannerlord Online, which now features huge PvP battles and clan territory control, well, as you can imagine, is a mod that kind of took things to another level. All this content kept the community deeply engaged. Even as some criticized Tailwars for not pushing it further, most players were overall satisfied because of the ecosystem around Bannerlord was so rich. The game had got some official accolades, and by 2023 it surpassed 5 million copies sold. An impressive milestone, proving that the patience had paid off commercially. And remember, these figures exclude most of the people that played on Games Pass or other streaming services. Bannerlord had kind of become a quiet mainstream success despite its kind of niche style of game. By the end of 2023, the relationship between Tailwards and its community felt a little bit more comfortable, but there was one last thing on the horizon. You see, Tailwards kind of went a bit quiet. 2024 saw pretty much nothing in terms of updates or patches for Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord itself, and people were then starting to wonder what happened. Had they given up on the game? Were they working on something new? And, well, half of that was right. Tailwards was not content to rest. Despite their silence, they hit big news in March of 2025. Right around Bannerlord's 5-year anniversary, as I'm bringing into your attention today, they announced War Sales, the game's first official expansion. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, was this a big one. War Sales is coming in June of 2025 and introducing a Nordic-inspired faction. Well, it is the Nords. It's adding in naval combat, stormy seas, sailors boarding enemy vessels, and even the promise of amphibious assaults on shoreline castles. If you are a Warband veteran, you'll recall fans having clamored for usable ships for ages. I mean, there were mods, but never official features. Now it's coming. The Nords are returning, and they're bringing their longbows. The devs actually hinted at this expansion a while ago, but we didn't know how big it was going to be. They're adding in a whole new region to the map with new weapons, armor, and gameplay mechanics that is all set around sailing. Being able to have skills and companions that are based on maritime escapades. You're going to be able to have different troop classes that are marine class lads, and they're going to be better at fighting on sea and boarding enemy ships. This announcement came with a lot of extra bits and pieces though. We're going to be getting more updates to the base game, including more cinematic stuff and a storyline, and a huge overhaul of any of the persisting issues that Mount & Blade has had. Overall, Bannerlord has had a long 5 years. It's gone ups and downs, especially with the relationship between Tailwards and its community, with great communication and updates kind of reverting back to almost nothing for a while, and finally Tailwards revealing what they'd been working on. I for one cannot wait for the future of Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord. With the War Sales expansion announcement, boy oh boy oh boy, there's a lot on its way, and they even mentioned and revealed that that was not the only expansion that was being worked on at the time. So maybe, just maybe, there is a brighter future for Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord 5 years later.